Welcome to the Elvis Presley channel. Ann-Margret remained married to Roger Smith for 50 years and remained a loyal wife. At the same time, she refused to speak poorly about Elvis, despite her heartbreak over the loss of their affair. Then, who was the real love of her life, her husband or Elvis Presley? Did Ann-Margret love Elvis Presley more than her husband? Make sure to watch the video until the end, and if you are new here, don't forget to join our wonderful community by subscribing to the channel. Who was the true love of Ann-Margret? Ann-Margret, a Swedish-American actress, was married to actor and producer Roger Smith for 50 years, from 1967 until he died in 2017. She was best known for her roles in Bye Bye Birdie and Viva Las Vegas. The couple had a long and lovely relationship during which he helped her in her alcoholism recovery. She also looked after him while he was sick, such as when he had Parkinson's disease and myasthenia gravis. Despite their affection for each other, Ann-Margret's most well-known romantic connection was with Elvis Presley. Ann-Margret worked alongside Elvis Presley in one of her most famous movies, Viva Las Vegas, and had a passionate relationship with him. After Ann-Margret and Presley's relationship ended, they shared a meaningful connection until he died in 1977. So the question arises, did Ann-Margret love Elvis Presley more than her husband? Keep watching this video till the end to know all the answers. Presley's movies are generally not highly considered. However, there are exceptions. One of them is the musical Viva Las Vegas. In the film, Presley plays a race car driver who falls in love with Ann-Margret's character. The two shared some legendary chemistry on screen, most famously in a scene where they danced very close to each other. Ann-Margret had already been dubbed the female version of Elvis before she met her Viva Las Vegas co-star on the set in 1963. Sparks immediately flew between Ann-Margret, then 22, and Presley, then 28. Ann-Margret claimed in My Story that she knew whatever happened between the King and her would be intense. They developed a romantic relationship. Ann-Margret and Elvis had a passionate relationship that grew into a long-lasting friendship and mutual respect over time. Many people, including Ann-Margret, believed they were soulmates. Ann-Margret stated in her 1994 autobiography, My Story, that her affair with Elvis seemed inevitable very immediately after they met. "We were indeed soulmates, shy on the outside but unbridled within," the actress wrote. "We both lived on the edge and we both were self-destructive in our own ways. In many ways both of us, despite fame and whatever else we'd achieved so quickly, had remained very childlike and emotionally dependent." According to the New York Times, she explained the relationship. "We were quiet, polite and careful," she wrote of their earlier days after being introduced. "But I knew what was going to happen once we got to know each other. Elvis did too. We both felt a current, electricity that went straight through us. It would become a force we couldn't control." The love between Ann-Margret and Elvis showed no signs of wearing off. It only deepened with time, and they learned to trust each other. As Elvis became more comfortable with Ann-Margret, they began to spend more time alone. During their private time together, Elvis opened up to her, perhaps more than he ever had with any other person in his life. Elvis had his dreams, desires, hopes, hurts, wants, and weaknesses, which he shared with her. Elvis, who was notably shy, chose to be vulnerable with her. But of course, there was one issue with their relationship: Elvis's fiancée, Priscilla Presley. At the time, Priscilla had been living at Graceland for a while and had only followed Elvis to the USA for 2 years. Behind the scenes, Elvis had promised to eventually marry Priscilla, but for just over 12 months, his focus was diverted. After just over a year of his relationship with Ann, Elvis's long-term girlfriend, Priscilla Presley, found out about the affair. Priscilla was obviously furious, and Elvis ended the relationship with Ann-Margret soon after. No wonder Elvis fell for Ann-Margret, but he had to choose one. While their affair was fiery and passionate, Elvis Presley still felt an obligation toward Priscilla Presley and felt as though he had to move ahead with their marriage. Eventually the two ended their affair, something that Ann-Margret says she knew had to happen eventually. Elvis tied the knot with Priscilla. Around the same time that Elvis married Priscilla, Ann-Margret wed Roger Smith. Although Ann-Margret was married to Roger Smith for 50 years, she and Elvis remained close friends until he died in 1977. For Ann-Margret, Smith was the right man from the beginning, but Elvis's friend Marty Lacker stated that in his opinion Ann-Margret and Roger temporarily split because she was still so in love with Elvis. So where did her relationship with her husband go from there? According to Arizona Central, they remained married until Smith died in 2017. Since their marriage began in 1967, they broke the stereotype that Hollywood marriages don't last very long. Ann-Margret said she respected Presley and she shined alongside him in one of her most famous roles. She also knew in her heart she was destined to marry Smith, but it didn't affect her relationship with Elvis. The King of Rock and Roll always sent Ann-Margret a guitar-shaped bouquet at her live performances till his death, and he often went to see her performance in person. Shortly after each of their respective weddings, Ann-Margret and Elvis met up again in Las Vegas. At Smith's urging, she attempted to further her career with a 5-week live engagement at the Riviera Hotel. The cabaret act was a fantastic success, earning reviews from critics and audiences. Elvis met up with her backstage to congratulate her. He also sent her a guitar-shaped floral arrangement for opening night that became their tradition. Ann-Margret recalled that the King of Rock and Roll headed into her dressing room and shut the door behind him. Their eyes met and they felt the spark. After Elvis congratulated her on her success, Ann-Margret began to thank him. Instead, he cut her off and began to thank her. His smile faded, she remembered, and his eyes lost their playfulness and turned serious. He went on to thank her for the happiness she'd brought into his life. Elvis then stepped forward and dropped to one knee. Taking both her hands in his own, he told her exactly how he still felt about her. While she already knew that he still had feelings for her, she confessed she was touched to hear his sweet words. Years later, in 1972, she, along with her husband, returned to Las Vegas after a devastating facial injury, and Elvis was the headliner at the same hotel. She regarded Elvis's presence as an extra bonus. She was pleased to know he was nearby, and she hoped they could connect somehow. Elvis was courageous enough to call Ann-Margret's hotel room. Elvis told Ann-Margret she looked wonderful, and that he was happy to have seen her during her recovery. But then things took a turn. Saying he was lonely, he asked if he could see me. It wasn't a question I'd anticipated since the afternoon, but hoped that he wouldn't really ask. Ann-Margret refused. After all, she was married to Smith. According to the Bye Bye Birdie Star, Elvis told her he understood. Ann-Margret knew Elvis was concerned about her well-being after her injury. He'd already sent flowers, but they hadn't gotten to see each other in person yet, until one night when he got her alone in her suite. It was clear, she wrote, that he wanted to get personal with her. Although his staff and her husband were both in the suite as well, she wrote in her book, "He wanted to know all about the accident of my recovery. It was so easy for us to sink into the closeness we'd always shared, but it was clear from some of Elvis's comments that he really missed having me in his life." While Ann-Margret surrendered Elvis's craving to speak to her, she also realized that her husband kept wandering by to check the thermostat. So even if she really loved Elvis more than her husband, she didn't choose to deceive her husband at any point. In one New York Times article long after her breakup with Elvis, the Swedish-American actress gave a telling answer to a reporter's question about whether Elvis was the love of her life. She responded, "I don't want to hurt," before cutting her sentence short. "The man that I married is the man I knew I was going to marry on the 3rd date. We've been together now for 30 years. Egad." However, she also remained a loyal friend to Elvis, and her husband Smith also accepted their friendship. Smith and Presley sometimes spent time together. Ann-Margret also occasionally spent time with both Presley and Smith at social events. This shows how unbreakable their bond was. In Las Vegas, she recalled in My Story, Presley once called Ann-Margret over, referring to her nickname Rusty, and asked her to stand still while he did karate chops in her direction. According to Ann-Margret, he wanted to show how close he could come to her face without touching or hurting her. Presley pulled it off, and Smith just grinned, even expressing his amazement at the King's skill in martial arts. Such a moment could easily have become awkward, but Smith understood her friendship with Elvis. For this also Ann-Margret gave all the credits to Elvis. She wrote, "If it had been another old boyfriend who periodically appeared in my life bearing flowers and gifts, I don't think Smith would have been as understanding. But Elvis was different. He was special, and like everyone else, Roger put him in a category all of his own." Ann-Margret insisted that Smith knew she and the King of Rock and Roll shared a bond that would never be broken, and he didn't try to break it. On the contrary, she wrote, Smith and Presley actually got along well and were friendly with each other. The lovers remained friends, and one day Margaret found out that the man she truly loved is gone forever. Margaret revealed the heartbreaking way she found out Elvis had died. On August 15th, 1977, Margaret didn't receive flowers on opening night for the first time in 10 years. She knew something was wrong. The next day she phoned Graceland, and that's how she got the news. Elvis Presley hadn't sent her flowers because he passed away. Though Ann-Margret was advised not to attend his funeral, she did anyway. After Presley's death, Smith also attended his funeral with Ann-Margret to pay his respects. She was one of the very few film colleagues who did attend. She still loved Elvis as a darling friend and wanted to honour his memory. Even decades later, Ann-Margret became emotional over Elvis's memory. "It was extremely difficult for me to write, and it's even harder for me to talk about." It's obvious that Elvis and Ann-Margret shared a relationship of deep affection, trust and respect. Even today it is plain to see from the many of their photographs together that there was something exquisite between them. And perhaps that was love, that Ann-Margret always talked highly of Elvis. So yes, Presley was the love of Ann-Margret's life, but there was no comparison to her husband. She loved Elvis as a darling friend and maintained a boundary. At the same time, she remained loyal to her husband till his death. Let's take a look at what she said about the King of Rock and Roll years after his death. The actress was notoriously tight-lipped about their romance. She did, however, discuss the King in her autobiography. While Elvis's reputation took some hits over the years, Margaret maintained that the Elvis she knew was a good man and wrote, "There's been so much, for some reason, negative situation surrounding his name that I wanted to show the man that I knew, generous, loving, funny, talented, gifted, and only show complete respect." Though she kept mentions of him in her autobiography rather vague, she did open up in a 1994 interview with Charlie Rose, the same year that Ann-Margret released her book. She mentioned that her connection to Elvis was very strong. She also stated that they had been together for 1 year, during which they developed a deep trust that she still respects today. She expressed that Elvis's talent wasn't acknowledged in his life as much as it was after he passed. Ann-Margret wrote in her book bluntly, "I will never recover from Elvis's death." While she does devote a chapter to their relationship, she never speaks of him in anything less than a totally complimentary way. She refuses to divulge dirt. Elvis trusted her. To betray his trust would be unthinkable, even after his death. In her 1994 interview, it was clear that Ann-Margret deeply cherished Elvis's memory. She added that those she is close with also appreciated who Elvis was, as he treated everyone in her life with kindness and respect. Ann-Margret admired his sensitivity and his originality. Though Elvis attempted to win her back at one point, she remained faithful to her husband, who she was with until he passed away in 2017. She was so loyal to her loved ones that she even remained in touch with Elvis's father. In early 1979, on hearing that Vernon Presley was seriously ill, Ann-Margret flew to Memphis to visit him. "We had a good visit, laughing and crying and trading stories," she recalled. "He told me how much he missed his son, and I said that I missed him too." To comfort him, she occasionally called Vernon during the months leading up to his death on June 26, 1979. There is no doubt that she was truly in love with Elvis and remained his loyal friend. The way Ann-Margret continued to speak of Elvis with nothing but fondness and affection long after his death shows how much she loved and respected him. Similarly, the way Elvis continued to send her flowers at her every opening shows how strong their bond was. Although Ann-Margret was married to Roger Smith for 50 years, she retained a strong affection for the rock and roll legend who was once her lover. She refused to speak poorly about him, despite her heartbreak over the loss of their relationship. But this didn't indicate that Ann-Margret didn't love her husband. She remained faithful to every relationship in her own way. Despite all that she and Elvis had gone through, their friendship is everlasting, and will always be remembered by their fans. Thank you for watching the video till the end. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. It is an extremely interesting approach to wonder how Ann-Margret's husband felt about what had been going on between Elvis and Ann-Margret for years. Find out now in this video. Was Ann-Margret's husband jealous of her relationship with Elvis Presley?